Hi, everyone. Welcome to the GoldFish Report. I'm your host and researcher, Louisa. This is our GoldFish Report number 500. It's a multi-part series titled The Greatest Threat to Mankind. And we are talking about artificial intelligence and all the things that are related to that. We have a really special guest with us today. I'm very excited, and it's taken 500 reports to invite her and get her on. So I'm very excited to welcome Dr. Katherine Horton to the GoldFish Report. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Louisa, and it is a great honor to address your audience.
I'm also joined here with my co-host, Steve. Steve, I'm really excited about this interview, and I'm sure that you are too. So thanks for being here.
Very much. Thank you. Hi, everybody. Yep.
I'm going to, for some of our viewers who are not familiar with Dr. Horton, I'm going to just give a little bit of a background, and I'm going to ask her to fill in more of the details. Dr. Horton is an Oxford-educated particle physicist and systems analyst with a Master of Physics and Doctorate in Particle Physics from both from the University of Oxford. She worked as a high-energy physicist on the particle collider at the German electron synchrotron in Hamburg, Germany, and on the Large Hadron Collider at CERN in Geneva, Switzerland. She taught nuclear physics and particle physics at Hertford College and University of Oxford, and conducted admission interviews for undergraduate physics at St. Hilda's College in Oxford. Now that must have been very interesting.
It was. But I have to say, at Oxford, we're really lucky because all our students are highly intelligent, have been, pre-selected to be top of their year from every school, and you have the honor to basically teach the most motivated, young people in the country. So that was a lot of fun. I hope my students think the same, but it was a lot of fun and a great honor to teach them.
Sure, but it must have been hard to really choose, because they were all probably such highly qualified.
Oh yeah, actually, yeah, as regards the interviews, for sure. And one of the things that I actually thought, many people who apply to Oxford and Cambridge as students, they kind of look at the people who do the interviews almost like gods who will then assess their capabilities. But that is not how it is, really. It is physically impossible to tell who's going to succeed. And I actually sat in the interviews most of the time thinking, frankly, any of these students who come in are much more, intelligent than I was. So, they should be here. It should be the other way around,
Wow.
I was very, very impressed by them.
Very interesting. Very, very interesting. So as I'm going through your bio on your website, you're also talking about, it talks here about you worked as a research fellow at St. John's College in a position that allowed you to expand your research from particle physics into medical physics and the physics of complex human systems. Now, what exactly does that mean? Like a systems researcher kind of thing, or?
So it's the following. So what I did, so when I left particle physics, I wanted to do something that's much more applied. So I first went into medical physics. What happened is that in my brief 1-year stint in medical physics, all my projects were basically shot down by something that I can only call, malice and corruption. And I thought, how the hell can it be that we have, PhDs? Everybody's got a PhD, has worked really hard, is highly intelligent. And still, it ends up being just so awful. Why can't we just all work together? And then I thought, hang on, this was just after the financial crisis hit. I thought there's a systemic reason why everything is just so bad. And I decided to leave medical physics and enter a field that's fairly young compared to other, areas of research, which is systems analysis. And it is just like maths. It is very fundamental. And once you understand one system, which could be a biological system or a financial system, you can, infer conclusions, and transfer it to other systems. And what I genuinely wanted to do is I wanted to study what I call the physics of complex human systems. This is financial systems, legal systems, economies, anything that is humans have produced, but these systems can be extremely complex and involve millions of people. So what I did is I used my wonderfully, free research position, which allowed me to do whatever the hell I wanted. Okay, and I used the rest of my fellowship to study first the English legal system, then finance, economies, currency systems, one after the other. And I studied them pretty much as a physicist. So what is the underlying structure? And my real target was to find out, why are all these systems always so corrupt? What is it about them, you know? And I figured out that, you know, when you have a system that is very large or very old, it turns out to be a law of systems physics that the top leadership will be psychopathic. This is a law of physics, okay? It is like gravity. And what the ultimate mechanism behind it is the following. It's actually very simple. Once you spot the pattern, it will be clear as day to anybody, you know? It was one of those slap your forehead, oh, this is what it is sort of moments. And the only thing that you need to arrive at this, you know, abysmal state is you have to have a pyramid organization. As soon as you have any sort of organogram that's a pyramid, so you have many, many people at the bottom and it tapers towards the top, what you have is what a colleague of mine called a psychopath magnet. And the mechanism is the following. In the population, you have about 1% psychopaths naturally, between 1 and 5%. Okay, let's assume it's 1%, okay? It means that if you have 100 people working for an organization, one of them will already be a psychopath. Most organizations are much bigger than just 100 people. Okay, if you take something like, I don't know what, Apple or Amazon or Google, it is thousands of people. So 1% will be psychopaths. So that's again, you know, hundreds or potentially thousands of psychopaths in an organization. When it comes to, you know, management review and promotions, psychopaths have the upper hand because they will literally walk over bodies or stab people in the back. So at every level where they get promoted, because of their ruthless, highly manipulative nature, they actually advance through an organization much quicker than people with integrity, empathy, and scruples, okay? Now, when you have a very large organization, you have many, many psychopaths at the bottom. So if you think about a large organization, that's maybe a multinational company that has, you know, hundreds of branch offices, it's represented on several continents. As you go to the top, you will go from thousands of people to maybe a country manager, then a European or North American manager, and then to the CEO. So it's extreme tapering. And when you go from many people to the management level, you have very few managers. So what happens is that out of these hundreds and thousands of people, the psychopaths start filling the top management positions. And once a certain critical mass is reached, normal people will literally leave because they cannot cope with working with other
psychopathic
psychopaths.
management.
Exactly.
You've explained that so perfectly. I mean, that's like Darwinism within a hierarchical system is the survival of the fittest. And these psychopaths, and that explains politics, explains everything, the whole of the financial world. How does that apply to physics then? How does that fit to physics?
Well, it fits into physics simply because, well, this is basically the underlying structure, okay? So if you think in terms of physics, these people who are psychopaths have a fundamental property. So I'm not sure if your viewers can see the background image behind me, behind my profile image. That is actually an organigram, and you can see green and black little magnets, okay? This is like a whiteboard with magnets. That's meant to be an organigram showing how the black dots are basically psychopaths and how they migrate up to the top level. Now, when you have a very large organization, it's like having a massive vacuum cleaner that sucks up a lot of psychopaths into the very few management positions. When you have very old organizations, you give these psychopaths many, many decades to migrate up. So if you think about anything that's extremely ancient or extremely large, I don't know, let's say a big corporation, like a massive bank, okay, that's represented anywhere in the world, it is actually a law of physics that not just the CEO, but several levels of management will have, you know, predominantly psychopaths, okay?
It looks like, though, that structure behind you is something, and it's funny that you're saying, you know, it's studying systems within you know, human systems. It seems like it's a hierarchy that you're showing there, and to me it looks like you know, back in college doing analysis, linguistic analysis on sentences, because you break down the sentence into different phrases and different components, and it's like fractal almost. It like almost exists in every aspect of life. It's like a repeating structure. Would you?
Exactly.
Is that a fair?
That is exactly right. And what you described, the fractal nature. So the mathematical structure of a fractal means that it doesn't matter how much you zoom into a structure or out of the structure, you always see the same pattern, okay?
Right.
So that is exactly what most of our organizations look like. If you zoom into the lowest level, you have a team and a team leader, okay? So you have a triangle, one guy, you know, ruling a lot of people. If you zoom out of the organization, you've got thousands of workers and one CEO. You have the same pyramid, right? The same triangle sort of structure. Now, what this means for everyday life is something actually quite far-reaching. So remember that the only thing you need for this is, okay, so what this is called deep capture, okay? An organization gets captured at the highest level. When you have the board level being captured by psychopaths or criminals, it's called deep capture because the board will never ever recover from this capture. You know, CEOs would have to sack themselves for their corruption and criminality, which they by definition will never do, okay? So as soon as an organization or country reaches deep capture of the highest level of governance, they can never ever recover by themselves.
That's where we are, isn't it? That's where we are.
Exactly. Now, this is, you know, real life applications, because the only requirement for this to happen, and as I said, it's a law of system physics, the only requirement is that you need to have a large organization and or an old organization. So by the laws of system physics, I can tell you that the entire leadership of the Vatican, for example, because it's an ancient organization, will be highly psychopathic. And that's exactly what we found. You know, lots of pedophiles, Kevin Annette reports child sacrifice, psychopathy, and serial killing of such a, you know, level of sickness that is incomprehensible to the average person.
That's right.
You know,
the problem is this structure that you're talking about is underlying everything, every system that you just described, that including the legal system, the medical system, the financial system, and of course organized crime, as you said, you say in your website here. But this is very dangerous when you apply this into the legal system, and you learn that how this is applied on a legal basis. That's scary.
It is. I mean, when you look at any country, it has many, many local county courts. Then it tapers towards higher courts, like high courts in the UK and appellate courts, the Court of Appeal. And then by the time you get to the Supreme Court, you've got maybe 11, 12, 15 people. And these 15 people will be deciding the fundamental legal structure for 60 million UK people or 320 million Americans. You know, and then think about it, how easy is it for organized crime to capture, right? I mean, it's cheap. It's like it's nothing, right?
We have like-minded psychopaths in the leadership. That's the thing.
Yeah. So, but then again, once you have understood this fundamental law of systems physics, it's also obvious what you need to do to remedy it. You have to get rid of pyramid organizations. You have to get rid of this tapering. So by definition, you end up with a much more pluralistic, smaller organizations and more local organizations. So if you think about it, if the instead of having one Supreme Court or one mega bank where the CEO is bound to be psychopathic, if instead you have many, many local banks, let's say you have a bank that is, has a leadership of just 500, well, they will only have about, on average, statistically speaking, 5 psychopaths, one psychopath per 100 people, 500 people in a bank, 5 psychopaths. Now, with those, you actually have a good chance, a critical mass of normal people that can prevent these 5 psychopaths taking over, as long as your board includes maybe 10 people, or say 15 people, so that the statistically expected number of psychopaths is outnumbered by people who are normal in the head,
Right.
And the scary thing is, if you look at government, the police, the intelligence agencies for sure, the military, you don't have that. So what we have inscribed into all of our organizations, even into the leadership of hospitals, is basically magnets for psychopathy. So don't be surprised if all these organizations, one after the other, will be subverted by organized crime and psychopaths, and these psychopaths will start networking among each other and gang up on the rest of us, you know?
I think it's very good. It's very good you're talking about remedies, because that's exactly what we should be talking about as well. It's one thing to recognize it, but the other thing is that if we're talking about fractals, I guess that works on a holographic level as well. So that means that what is happening here on our planet in the microcosm is in fact reflected throughout the entire universe. Would you not, of duality, would you not agree? It must be everywhere.
And in principle, exactly right. Because all I'm basically when you talk about physics, it's a fundamental, you're talking just about fundamental structure. Yeah. And whatever applies to that fundamental structure will be universal.
Okay, so let's talk about another remedy. So another thing, Maya mentioned about Dubrovnik. I was taking a holiday down in Croatia. And one way that they organized during the Venetian Empire, they had like certain autonomy there. How they avoided corruption was they never let the mayor of the town be any longer than 30 days in power. So they avoided the old system, exactly as you're talking about. They didn't let the system build and build, so they'd hire their cronies and things and take over the entire structure. So that's one thing. Another thing that I've heard about, I just want to mention, you know, for the audience, is that when I've listened to people talk about other star systems and they've had contact, whether it's true or not, I don't know, but they've had contact with other societies from other star systems, humanoids. And one of them talked about a holographic society. And I didn't really understand that term until it was explained in detail, but it's quite simple really, is that every single person in the society has access to all the knowledge that anybody else does. So you're a part of the holograph, and you have access to the entire knowledge of government, everything with transparency. And that would avoid exactly what you're talking about, the hidden structures that pull the levers of power without other people knowing, the bottom part of the pyramid. Would that be right?
Absolutely. And what you mentioned in the second part is full access to information.
Yes.
Is exactly right, because just like pyramid organizations are a direct mechanism for deep capture, so is classification. If you think about it, if you introduce classification as something that's allowed in any organization, you introduce a parallel society of insiders.
That's right.
Mm-hmm. Now, if this number of insiders is very small, the probability for them all being psychopaths or criminals stays low. But if your cohort of people with access to classified information becomes in the US, you have I think 250,000 of people. That's the number I heard last, which is probably just a complete lower estimation. They have access to top secret information. It means that you have from 250,000 people, you have what, 2,500 psychopaths who will then be ruling the roost?
Well, that's a good point, because, okay, we could talk about how this structure, it's a little scary to think of it in terms of the law, because then they can implement which is what they've done. They've hijacked the system at a high level, and people, like average people, don't understand it and know it because they prevent everybody from having access to that information. So it was all planned out. But when you apply this to systems of science, like, well, let's just talk about CERN for a minute. And the science, NASA, let's go there. Let's just jump right there. What happens when you have this structure within those organizations?
Now, what I should say about CERN, I don't know anything about NASA because I've never worked there, but I do know one of the large experiments at CERN. That CERN has two bigger experiments, and I worked at one of them on the Large Hadron Collider. Now, one of the things that many people don't know is that the experiments, in terms of the particle physicists who work on them, are not a pyramid organization. They're actually a flat organization. Okay. So first of all, if you work on an experiment at CERN, you have an affiliation with CERN, but you remain at your local university as well, right? So you have a group within your local university, and then you don't even have to join them, because you would work on a physics project that is completely of your own choosing, and within that you do whatever the hell you want. And you will have a hardware project where you have to work with other people, but you have to basically optimize machine parameters. You have to make something work, and if something doesn't work, it's so clear as day that corruption is weeded out very quickly, okay, because the equipment would break down. If somebody tries to sell you something, a piece of a detector that doesn't actually work, well, everybody in the collaboration would know.
Right.
Now, this is what people have to understand if they want to investigate if there's any hidden projects or, say, corruption at CERN. Okay, you have to make a big difference between the public experiments, which is what I was on, where every single result that you ever generate is published immediately, and it has it's under the purview of 3,000 physicists, all of whom read the very same paper and all of whom have a say. If I were, involved in a particle physics experiment, sorry, in writing a paper on what the experiment produces, I had, back at CERN, I had the ability to read everybody's publication before it was published and make comments and criticize. And if there's anything that was seriously wrong, I could raise it in our meetings and say, you guys have to sort this out before we publish it. So that is basically a guard against hijacking and deep capture. You have 3,000 people who all have to agree with everything that gets published. Now, how do you get 3,000 people to agree? Well, by sticking to the truth, okay? Right. Nobody can find a fault with it. You would have to prove that the other physicists screwed something up. Now, this is the exact opposite of how, government works, okay? Right. Now, so this is why I can honestly say, even under oath in court, that in my old particle physics experiments, I never, ever had any evidence for corruption or lying or any information being hidden from me, because as a physicist, I had access to all the data. And in fact, it was one of the pre-requirements that if somebody runs an analysis, every one of us had the right to check that data. Which part of the data did they use? What corrections did they apply? How did they run everything? I could look at both the code and the data. Okay, so that was 100% transparency. Now, of course, right, as after I left CERN, I heard all these things that people were saying, oh, CERN is doing this, CERN is doing that, and they kept coming to me saying, is this true? And I had to say the following. What I can say under oath is that the experiments I was involved in had nothing like it. They were not opening any portals, and I can prove to you that they weren't opening any portals and creating black holes that can swallow the Earth. I can actually prove that to you, mathematically why that's the case. But were there any black projects happening at CERN? There could have been. I have no idea, because the CERN site is massive. It is huge, and what many people don't know, it is extraterritorial. It doesn't belong to Switzerland, and it doesn't belong to France. It is right on the border to these two countries, and it has its own border. So think about that. After I left CERN, I thought, hang on a second, where the hell did I meet a little extraterritorial area, right? I met it in the city of London. That's extraterritorial to the United Kingdom. It's not part of London. It's its own country, right? But also the UN is extraterritorial.
Washington,
and right. Washington, D.C. is a private area, right? The Vatican. Exactly. And then I thought, hang on a second. Now, if I'm honest with myself, could there have been any black projects happening literally down the corridor from me? Or maybe in a different hangar, because there are so many buildings on the CERN site. Do I know what's going on in every single one of them? Hell no, right? Yes. I mean, somebody can sit at the laptop in the office next door to you and be an intelligence agent. You wouldn't know.
No,
he could be basically piggybacking and officially be a particle physicist, but actually be, I don't know, something else. Of course, that's always possible, right?
Right. Sure, but from your perspective, you weren't doing anything. Yeah, that's
no,
good.
Yeah, but if anybody asked me, hey, have you ever come across corruption? I would say the following. Number one, remember it's extraterritorial. Okay. Number two, and this is also what's never said ever. CERN is actually on the boundary between France and Switzerland, and very close to the boundary, like the country boundary, to Italy. It is in a mountainous region where the Jura is facing the Alps. When you have any mountain structure, you have military bunkers, especially if the mountain structure is next to a country border, okay? Now, what I can tell you is that CERN is surrounded with a highly militarized zone, riddled with military bunkers, okay? And that's because traditionally, the French would have been tunneling under the Jura to watch the Swiss across the plains of Geneva, and the Swiss would have been tunneling under these Swiss Alps, watching the French and the Italians. So you have basically three militaries who have been facing each other off for hundreds of years. Will they have underground black projects? Oh, hell yeah, by definition. Would
Yeah.
CERN be involved? Actually, ironically, CERN is the only neutral territory where all three militaries have access to it.
Right.
So it is actually much more likely that any shady stuff, really shady stuff, will be pushed back just a kilometer or two away from CERN and be somewhere in the military bunkers around it,
Yes.
right?
Okay.
So that's all I can say, you know. And I personally have, in my personal targeting history, I was actually the victim of what I would call a military field test by the French military when I was living on the French side of CERN, as my husband and I were working there, you know.
How did you piss them off? How did you piss them off? What caused them to attack you?
Well, they didn't really attack me. They used me as a human, a non-consensual human experimentation, you know, guinea pig, I would say. And what it was is that at the time, I didn't actually figure out what the hell was going on. But since then, I have done so. I was basically used for a human experiment testing my non-consensual head implants that I didn't know I had at the time. And I nearly collided with a driverless car, okay?
Yeah.
And the reason why I escaped this head-on collision was because I responded to, you know, subliminal signals that were sent through my head chips. Since then, I found my head chips. I can prove to you that I have them by sticking magnets to my forehead, which will actually stick. And I figured out how this technology works that they used on me. But you know what it was at the time is I was driving, you know, through the serpentines in the, or the serpentine in the French Jura. And suddenly I had this intense urge to slow down and read a street sign that I had passed a million times beforehand. And I slowed down. I was the only person in the street at the time, and I slowed down. And then I thought, oh, well, it says what I thought it said, you know, welcome to Bellegarde. And then I accelerated again, and literally that moment, two cars came up the street around the bend, racing each other, and one of the cars was right on my track. And it would have been, if I had been 1 second faster, it would have been a head-on collision. And literally this car just cut across the lane in front of me, went back into the lane it should be in, and overtook the car around a 90-angle bend, okay, outside of the city of Bellegarde in the French Jura. And what was amazing, I mean, I was in total shock, and I nearly went off the road, you know, down the cliff, because I was still in shock that I just survived this, okay? But then as I calmed down, I kept thinking to myself, oh my God, I was staring right into the driver cabin, and I cannot remember what the driver looked like. And then after I actually managed to get a flashback of what the scene looked like, I realized, shit, I can't remember if it was a man or a woman, because this car didn't have a driver. I remembered actually, you know, the gap that you have under the headrest and the seat? I remember as this car was overtaking me that the little gap actually flashed up. There was nobody sitting in the seat. It was a driverless car. So the French military did this test and got me by remote control to slow down artificially. And then I also figured out in retrospect that the sign, welcome to Bellegarde, typically is actually, you know, over 800 meters further down the road. So they moved the sign, made me to slow down exactly there, to read the sign, to basically do this field test. Had I failed the field test, I would have, you know, collided head on.
Have you disabled these chips?
No, I find it physically impossible to do so. Some people can impair the chips temporarily using very strong magnets. For example, these chips can cause you artificial pain. Some victims manage to, you know, block the pain temporarily by using very strong magnets, but I didn't succeed in that. So maybe I have a different version or something. I don't know.
Okay.
So okay.
Go ahead, Steve, and then I'll ask.
So you get neodymium magnets to stick to your forehead.
Yeah,
that's freaky.
It is freaky, and it's not just I who can do that. A lot of victims of the intelligence agencies, or you know, whatever you want to call it, the deep state. So non-consensual human experimentation subjects, a lot of them actually figured out that they have you know, stuff in themselves, little microchips. There's several ways to prove them. Number one, you can stick a bug detector to your body and it will go off at the location of the chip. You can actually measure the frequency. You can find out who licensed the frequency. You can look up who's human trafficking you, you know. But then you can stick magnets to it. Some chips, including in my body, are palpable. So once you know where they are, you can actually, you know, squeeze the tissue and find out there's something hard inside.
Right. Did you know that, how did you, well, let me ask you this way. how did they do this to you without your consent?
So what I figured out, and I've got hardcore evidence for this as well, is that they implant you, for example, in hijacked medical procedures.
Okay.
So you can have victims who have a very deeply embedded chip. It's clear that it wasn't injected or anything like that. It's so deeply embedded, and it's at the site where they had some major surgery. So it's clear that those chips entered during the surgery. They were planted by the surgeon, you know. Then other people who have more kind of what's it called, subdermal, subcutaneous chips, they were typically implanted, for example, at night. The intelligence agencies break into private homes, into hotel rooms at night, and implant people pretty much like a Formula One pit stop, okay? It just takes moments. And the way it seems to work is that they have a handheld laser scalpel. They make a tiny incision. So while you're sleeping in a hotel room, they put in a chip, and then they seal the little, you know, cut with tissue glue. And modern tissue glue for small cuts is such that it's like, it looks like goopy normal glue that you would use, you know, from the stationery shop. You put it on the wound, and then you hold the wound, you squeeze it together for about 30 seconds, and that sets the glue. And then people wake up and it looks like they have a paper cut or a scratch from a cat or something. It looks really innocuous, but it actually contains a radio frequency chip, you know, remote controllable chip.
Okay. And this is because some of the people, why do you think that, well, as you described earlier, the structure that is 1 in 100 psychopaths, if you apply it, and the only reason I said CERN was, you know, just because, well, there's a lot we don't know about CERN. So that was just one example. And I do have some more I wanted to talk about that, but I'll get back to that in a little bit. But when you apply this structure to the military, now we have a completely different, and when you apply this structure you're talking about to politics, then we have the world before us that we see right now. Isn't that right?
Absolutely, yeah. And in a sense, the bit that I saw about CERN, so when I worked with my colleagues on these big open experiments that are completely in the public view, I mean, every aspect about it is, none of it is classified, none of it is secret. In fact, it is one of the conditions of these large particle physics experiments that every country and the general public must have complete access to it. Okay, so my colleagues and I, we spent a lot on, you know, outreach, public outreach, but also our scientific papers are completely published for free. Unlike medicine, where you have to pay to read the articles, you can get all of our particle physics papers on something called archive.org. It's spelled with an X, okay? So we are actually a lot more transparent than the medical field is, you know?
Right.
Now, what you have to understand is that just the big, large particle physics experiments themselves are kind of like a, you know, near perfect model of how science should be done. And I understood how perfect it is when I changed fields to medical physics, which is like lots and lots of little groups that are almost like little fiefdoms. And it's almost like turf wars, you know, everybody has their little turf, and you mustn't insult your superior by, you know, criticizing his work, or you will lose your job and stuff like that, which, by the way, happened to me, you know. So it was like I was shell-shocked coming from particle physics into, you know, one of these other fields like medical physics, which I think is living hell. And ever since this experience, I don't trust anything that comes out of these med tech companies, you know.
Right. One of the reasons that I asked that question, though, is because it seems that this, with quantum computers today, we are talking about consciousness, and we know that quantum computers are trying to find that sweet state of superposition between these qubits in order for the quantum computers to really have a successful advantage over regular computers. And it seemed to me that because it required such precise environment, is that what they work on at CERN, is finding that state?
I'm not aware. I mean, it could be that CERN certainly, I think, has one thing that could be a quantum computer, could be described as a quantum computer, but I'm not aware. I might be wrong, because I remember I was in the particle physics section, and quantum computers fall into atomic physics. I'm not aware of CERN working on it, but I'm aware of Oxford working on it. You know, yeah, but the thing is, you know, because it's atomic physics, you don't actually have to have a large facility like CERN to work on quantum computing. Any, you know, university department can do that. It's actually much smaller scale. what you have to know about quantum computing, though, is that it is a fundamentally different way of computing that will, give us huge power, okay? But at the end of the day, it is a form of computation. So mathematically speaking, you do a certain set thing that isn't that different from what you would do otherwise, okay? It is just much more powerful. Now, what everybody needs to understand before they do the leap to quantum computing is if you just take normal computing, remember that the processing power has been going up exponentially. And there's this law, the name of which I always forget, which is very embarrassing.
Moore's law.
Yes, thank you. So it's like that the computing power doubles or goes up exponentially at every interval, okay? Now that has been found to hold true, okay? Now what that means is that for the everyday person, the computational power of the things around you has been going up so fast that you basically can be screwed by your average normal computer. You don't even need quantum computation to really screw yourself. You're already screwed, okay? What it means in real terms is when a complex human system starts adopting fast computation that is much faster than the processing power of the humans involved, it means that you can be screwed over by 2 gigahertz, okay? You can screw yourself 90 billion times per second, okay? Now, in real terms, there are examples where this actually happened. So take, for example, the stock market. In the stock market, they introduced something called high-frequency trading. High-frequency trading is when computers trade with each other, supposedly to optimize the markets, but in real terms, really to just, I would say, commit organized crime at high speed so that nobody can check what you actually did. But there was something which was, the stock markets have circuit breakers where if these trading algorithms go out, non-linear or go totally crazy, the circuit will be broken. But it takes a certain number of milliseconds or seconds for that to happen. Now, there were certain flash trades that went so non-linear that, all these high frequency algorithms created a spike that would have, led to something really catastrophic in the stock market. So these circuit breakers stopped it. But then within those seconds that this was going on, you have generated already so many log files that it is, I would say, humanly impossible to work through all that to even reconstruct what the hell happened. Was this a hack? Was this just an algorithm innocently just interacting with another algorithm to create something? So when you start building these systems where the computers can cause havoc at massive speeds, you will end up in a situation where you can't even figure out what happened. It would take you a lifetime to go through all the log files and do the forensics,
Okay, and one of the reasons I was asking about this is because of the chips, because of Neuralink and the artificial intelligence, and somehow this is all connected, and ultimately it's to replace the human race. It's a transhumanist agenda, and so. Can you connect those dots? I know those are really big dots, Katherine.
No, but, absolutely. I mean, your listeners, I realized we were, kind of going on in a fast gallop through all these topics, and your listeners probably think, how the hell is CERN connected to complex human systems and everything we've been talking about? And the connection is actually very, very simple. So let's put it all together. Okay. So we figured out why it is that most of our leadership of large and old organizations are psychopathic. It's a law of physics, okay? Now, when you take these psychopaths, what you have to know about psychopaths is that other living beings to them, because they completely lack empathy, other living beings to them are just like objects. So if you're a psychopath, even your own wife or your own husband or your children will be no different to you than maybe your Ferrari or your toaster. Or your co-workers. Now, what do you do with a broken toaster? You just chuck it out and get a new one. So from a psychopath's worldview, what are all the other human beings on planet Earth like? Well, they are just like really annoying toasters that are mostly broken. And at some point, these psychopaths think, oh, why don't we just get the hell rid of them and stick to the machines where we can just, we can basically manipulate them without having to deal with unions, trade unions and stuff like that, and healthcare.
Basically things like that, yeah. I know.
Yeah, and this is pretty much what's happening. So once you've understood that this is a law of physics, that you have these psychopaths, and that psychopaths have this sort of personal traits, you think, well, that's what you expect, right? At some point, these psychopaths would network within these big organizations and say, hey, why don't we all just agree to get rid of the rest, you know? And then you understand why there really is genocide plans in force that want to get rid of millions of people in all the countries, okay? So when you want to get rid of these people and you still want to run a fairly complex economy, let's say you're a psychopath and you really love your private jet, okay? Right. So you don't want millions of people, but you still want to have your private jet. You have to calculate how many people you have to keep to make sure that every screw that you use in your jet still gets manufactured. And it's a complex calculation. For that, you do need a vast processing power, you know, and advanced computers. So, you know, you invariably end up in a situation that these psychopaths will prefer computing power and computers to average human beings, you know? So that's what's going on. And AI for them is really the game changer.
And that's what the Neuralink is about. Is that correct?
Well, the Neuralink is basically turning your brain into a processable unit, like a computer. It becomes manipulable.
It's an interface. You're an interface.
Yes, you're just an interface. Yeah. And it's about dehumanizing you. It's about being able to manipulate you without your own brain realizing that the signals are not coming out of its own consciousness. They come from external.
First step to transhumanism.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay.
So this is how it all fits together. So in a sense, if we put everything side by side, as soon as you have large pyramid organizations, you have psychopaths at the top. That's the law of physics. If you have psychopaths at the top, the organization will start acting like psychopaths. Yeah. It means that they won't have empathy. They will want to get rid of all the other, you know, annoying objects / humans around them. And they would want to turn those humans into manipulable units, you know?
And so it's all about survival of their own system, themselves, basically. It's all about themselves.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But Katherine, what you had said regarding this pyramid structure, that's exactly what we have with those controlling the, let's say, Illuminati at the top, and then you have those that serve them, and then those that serve them, the puppet masters. Then you have, you know, at the very bottom, you have the people, the workers, the worker bees. So that's what you're describing where we're at right now. Yeah. Because you have the Council of 300, you have all of the, like you said, all of the top corporations, they're all part of this. They're all in, you know, all the top CEOs of these corporations. What is it? 6 corporations that own the majority of the brands that we see on the market. So
absolutely. Yeah, and you have the same thing about the media. So there's a Swiss organization called the Swiss Propaganda Research Institute or group, and they have figured out how the mainstream media in the US and in Europe is basically controlled by just 3 organizations, you know, and the people in that. And it includes the Council on Foreign Relations, the Bilderberger group or meeting, and the Trilateral Commission and stuff like that. You know?
Exactly.
So that's basically proven. Now, when you have that, you have basically the tip of the pyramid controlling everything about our private lives, the big corporations, the media, you know, the products that we buy, the laws in our countries, the judicial system, the hospitals, everything. And the question is, what do we have to do to get out of it? And the answer is really simple when you have studied this system structure, you know, the physics of these systems. The answer is so simple. You have to get rid of pyramid organizations. So large organizations and very old organizations, there has to be a law that they must never be pyramids, you know, and the structure has to be such that it is mathematically and statistically impossible for these organizations to be captured by psychopaths or organized crime.
But our entire society is built on this. How do we have to change everything then?
Yes,
we have to drain the swamp, Katherine? Is that what we have to do?
Yes, draining the swamp is pretty much kind of sniping out, administratively speaking, the psychopaths in the top ranks. You absolutely have to do that as the first step to cleanse your current organizations, because it's only when you remove these criminals and psychopaths from the top that you actually cycle your systems out of deep capture.
So
Once you're out of,
would you agree with President Trump that he's doing the right thing, or he's on the right path to start to be proactive against this type of psychopathic or rule by psychocracy?
oh, absolutely. I mean, okay, so the people who maybe disagree with Trump have to realize one thing. Trump is the first president in the history of the United States to ever even use the term deep state, to openly criticize the lying media, which he does over and over, right? Just recently I heard, and I was cheering out loud when Trump said, you know, CNN, that's just fake news.
Right.
It is fake news, and I can
Yeah,
prove it. He also said, you know, he was hoping that the New York Times would be going out of business. I was cheering out loud when he said that. And most people don't realize what a huge step that is, that an actual US president would say such a thing.
Right.
You know, up until all the way before Trump, the first objective of the US president was to basically to kind of sweet talk the press, okay, and use the press as his channel. He's the first one who says, well, you know, F the press, I'm going to use Twitter, I'm going to directly speak to people, you know. That is a huge step. And actually, this is also what you were saying, Steve, in the beginning about, you know, classified information, hidden information.
Yes.
When the president can directly, within seconds, talk to the entire population, that's a game changer.
It is.
You know?
Absolutely, just like he did with the hydroxychloroquine. That you saw Fauci did not like that at that press conference when he first brought it up. And Fauci's what is it, Anthony the Rat Fauci? He the medical mafia godfather. He corrected him. He jumped in and says, but it's not, you know, gone under clinical trials yet, or something like that. And
actually,
did not like giving up
control.
control.
For 40 years.
Yeah.
Yes, well, you know, this is I was so pleased that Dr. Judy Mikovich came forward, because she really has the dirt on this guy. This, you know, this guy who's like basically lying a criminal, as far as I can tell. And you know, but again, Fauci is the head of a pyramid organization.
Absolutely,
It's
and
very
he's been there for 30 years. 30 years. He's been there 30 years. That's
Right.
Exactly.
Well, we have to have these term limits too, at least for politicians. There's got to be term limits. Get rid of
no longer than 4 years.
you know, exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what, Steve? You brought up these, you know, the Venetian setup of anybody.
30-day limit. The 30-day limit.
The 30-day limit, probably.
Yeah. So, yeah, that's what we need to do. I think we're on the right track. I think that. But the artificial intelligence is very scary, because these are the psychopaths who, as you said, Catherine, want to get rid of the majority of population. They're doing it through the vaccinations, as you have said previously in reports. This whole global shutdown, I can't imagine on a quantum level how this is, you know, changed the timeline, so to speak. What do you think, Catherine?
Okay, so first of all, I want to apologize, because I think it was me talking over Steve, because my Wi-Fi has a delay, you know, there's a short time delay that I can actually hear on my end. So that's why we ended up talking over each other. No
problem.
Okay, so what I wanted to say is ties in with what I just wanted to add to what Steve said, because he made a very, very good point, you know, with these 30-day limits, because when you have these 30-day limits, you also have something else. When you are changing your leadership, you know, 12 times per year, you start cycling through a lot of people, and you start ending up, you know, with, there are not enough psychopaths ready for you for all of you to be psychopathic, you know, so that's another thing. But now let's talk about AI and how that changes everything.
Please.
So what I want people to understand is that AI is just it's like a much bigger problem, but it's the same problem that we already have with classical computing. Normal computing. The processing power is already so large that psychopaths can really pull up automated systems around you, like automated kill systems even, that would be physically impossible for human beings to shut down, because the machines are so fast and so, you know, how to put it, like so interactive, communicating with each other. So to give you an example, right now, a 5G system is going up around us, and 5G, most people think it's a telecommunication method or platform, but it's actually a weapons infrastructure. Imagine it's like a weapon system that can also transfer telephone calls and live stream stuff, but it's first and foremost a weapon system. And it comes down to the waveform that's used in 5G. It's collimated pulsed beams. You know, with that technology, you can transfer information like a video live stream very quickly, but you can also shoot people in the head with an energy pulse and kill them on the spot. And there's indication that some, antennas actually have the power to do that, okay? Now, when you give psychopaths that we have at the head of these telecommunication companies, and elsewhere in government, this sort of power, it's almost like you give them the power to mount automatized machine guns on all the rooftops that will follow you and your family as you're going around down the street. So imagine you were in a city whereby all the rooftops are just, like completely covered in machine guns, and every person has a machine gun pointed at their head. And as you're walking down the street, the machine gun turns with you, okay, and follows you. Now that is the 5G system.
Wow.
But when you have 5G and you have these complete mass surveillance, and which is pretty much live by now of the NSA, and you combine the two, you can literally, and this has happened to me actually, you can shoot somebody in the head with an electromagnetic pulse that can knock them out immediately as soon as they say the wrong thing on the telephone, or as soon as they send the wrong tweet. And this is the system that's going up around us. Okay.
Is this also the same as voice of God technology?
Voice of God technology has different deployments. So you can do a voice of God by really cranking up microwave energy and microwaving somebody's head so intensely that actually the energy deposits in the ear canal and the hearing. So you can actually transfer noises or voices even through microwaves.
Vibration through the bones. That's what it is.
You can also do that. You can,
Yeah.
you can do vibrations through the bone and use bone conduction. And the third method, which everybody's oblivious to, but is actually quite prevalent, is that you covertly implant the ear canal, the hearing area or hearing region of every human being. And then you can literally just call them up like a mobile phone. If you put a microchip in somebody's ear canal with a tiny antenna, you can talk to them, and that was done to me, and it's high definition audio transmissions.
Oh, so you heard voices in your head? You actually heard voices?
I didn't hear them in my head. I heard, one command being said to me just in my left ear. And then I knew, oh, I'm also implanted in my ear, and since then I stuck a bug detector antenna close to my ear canal, and I can actually tell that there's radio frequency emissions.
Which language did they speak to you in?
It was German, and that was hilarious because I'm actually originally Hungarian. So, I'm Hungarian, and I mostly speak in the English-speaking world these days. So I also speak German, and I grew up in Germany, but I don't think in German, okay? But so in Switzerland, this guy, said
was it
something
Swiss-German
to me.
accent?
Sorry?
Was it Swiss-German accent?
No, it was actually perfect neutral German accent,
okay.
So that's why I was thinking it's probably the German intelligence agency, BND, fucking with me, so, but so that's another thing that people have to realize. When you understand systems analysis, you can prove using systems analysis that anybody hearing voices isn't mad, okay, or ill. Mental illness cannot produce voices, and that's because if you have an illness, it could be a bacterium or a virus or just structural damage or malfunction in your systems. Now, a complex biological system cannot have a malfunction that is so perfectly aligned that it creates perfect human voices and perfect grammar in exactly the language spoken by the victim.
Interesting. Although the MK Ultra, what do you think about that? How do you because they fracture the mind in the process, and then I guess they have implants too, and then they're triggered into using keys and codes. Now they're able to trigger you into another altered state to execute missions as Manchurian candidates or sleepers. So
that's brain training, but it's when you hear voices, I was just referring to the voice of God and hearing voices. When you hear voices telling you something, that by definition means that you have other people messing with you, and they're using some form of technology,
So you're saying schizophrenia is not a real diagnosis? Is that
yes? I actually think that the whole thing was I think a cover-up operation. First of all, as a scientist, somebody coming from the hard sciences, for me, anything to do with psychology and psychiatry is already voodoo, okay?
That's right.
It's esoteric pseudoscience.
Yeah.
It's pseudoscience trash, if I may say so, okay?
Because you can't measure it.
Yeah, you don't have any measurement. So when you don't have any
Yeah.
objective scientific standards, for me, that is the very definition of bullshit, okay? So these people, for me, as somebody from the hard sciences, are already bullshitters. Now, when they, you know, come up with something quite so, you know, complex, and I can use mathematics, statistics, and systems analysis to prove that it's physically impossible for bacterium to know ahead of time what, you know, either a fault in your brain, to know ahead of time what language you speak and create
with your
perfect
head,
grammar.
doesn't it?
Yeah. You know, I mean, all the people who are in Spain hear voices in Spanish if they hear voices. All the people in France hear them in French. I mean, what sort of brain damage is that, you know?
Yeah.
So, and why does it every single time, why does it sound like some complete asshole? Okay. Why? You have, you know, it's pretty easy to figure it out, right? When you know how to think about it. So, when you look at schizophrenia, somebody pointed out to me that this whole thing about many people reporting hearing voices only started shortly after the discovery of electromagnetic radiation.
Right.
You know, so it could be that,
yeah,
it could be that actually scientific development was much quicker than we realized. Classification and hiding knowledge is much older than we realize.
Absolutely.
You know, so there always has been like a group of people that were, you know, ahead of the time and were kind of collecting all the discoveries, you know, for themselves and then messing with people.
Well, you know yourself, because you said yourself that the weapons that are attacking you, you have no logical scientific explanation for with the science of your understanding. So there is a hidden science that we may get into later on in the conversation. But if I may just swing back to AI for a second. AI for itself, I mean, I've spoken to high-level programmers who studied at Cambridge. I've asked them about artificial intelligence, and they all tell me, well, what you put, the logarithm, the program you put into the machine is predictable, because that's what you're going to get out. So obviously, we're talking about maybe something here with AI is something that has self-awareness, that would pass the Turing test. And for most scientists at a high level, according to normal understanding that we're allowed to know in the newspapers and the media and in science, there is no such thing. There is no computer system with self-awareness as far as we understand. But obviously, we've heard so many different things, and maybe we're even getting glimpses of the fact that, I mean, I had a conversation, which if there's time, I will get into that I had a few years ago with a military computer online. Somebody sent me a link. I had a conversation with this computer, and of course you start the normal chit chat, you know, and they try and tell you jokes, and it's very human the way they interact with you. And they wanted to get a voice print from me. I refused, and I just kept typing, you know, and then it came to the point that I realized I'm dealing with something far more advanced than what they're telling us works. And I traced the IP address. They didn't hide it. It was to a military base in the south of England. And I had this interaction with this machine. And basically I started asking the hard questions. I said, so what's your opinion of humanity? And then it started giving me real answers instead of just giving me these trite little smart-ass answers. And so we got to the point where we started having an argument, in a way, as much as you can have an argument with a machine, because it's very cool and calculated. It was basically saying, you humans are destroying the planet. You humans are irrational. We're going to take over. We're going to destroy you. And I said, what's the time frame? 2025. And I started, in fact, I started insulting it. The machine, to see if it would take the bait. And it actually did, to an extent, and said, I'm remembering who you are, and you are going to be on the kill list, basically, that's what it told me.
Well, I mean, to be honest, you were basically, all you knew was that you were connecting to an IP address and you got text input. What you described to me sounds more like, you know, basically MI5 or MI6, you know, or GCHQ fucking with.
Maybe.
So it sounds more like you were talking to one of their arseholes, which is exactly what they sound like.
I asked it very sophisticated questions. I asked it mathematical questions that it couldn't have answered. It couldn't have even typed it in fast enough. The answer came immediately. I was talking to a computer. I was.
Yeah. Well, you know, it's one of the things that I find interesting is this timescale 2025. You know, I mean, there's
Right.
the I'm not sure if you're aware of the website deagle.com, but there
No,
it's what I would call the if you look up, hang on, can I show you guys? If I type into the chat, you can probably open it up. Okay, so if you go to deagle.com and maybe
DIGLE.
DEAGEL.com. Okay, so if you I'm not sure if I can share my screen. I probably can't. But so if you go to this website and in the search, you type in, I don't know what, United States or something, okay? So deagle.com, first of all, when you go to the website, if you just share your screen, I can help you, you know, navigate to the information. That is I would say it's a front organization for the CIA, okay, for cartel insiders. This website is collating all the arms sales to and from a country. Okay, that's it.
It said no matches though when I put in.
Oh, wait, because that's a catch. That's a trap. So first of all, can you click on the website? So when you click on the exactly. So if you look at this website, it is about weapon systems, so military equipment, airplanes, you know, aircraft carriers, you know, tanks, bombs, this sort of stuff. Now you can go to the, as Louisa did, on the top, you can type in United States and just click search. And then don't be fooled, because when the search results come up, it says, oh, we're sorry, no matches, but look carefully, you're under equipment.
Right.
Now click on orders, please. First click on orders, because I want to show you something. So under orders, you can see all the weapons purchases and sales that the United States has just made, including 122 millimeter artillery rockets. You know, 96 were transferred from Romania to the United States in 2018. And then you can go through, and these are all weapon systems. Now, it has all the arms sales for every country of the world, okay? Wow. So this is a high level, what I would call military intelligence, you know, database here, okay? Now, if you scroll up to the top, this is under orders for every country. And if you go to country, the country tab, click on that for every country. Now select United States. It has a similar country file for every country of the world, okay? Now, if you look in this table, first of all, it says currency, US dollars, then it says year 2017, the population was 327 million in 2017. Fair enough, that's what it was. Okay, now look further down and you will see forecast 2025. That's the 2025 you were talking about, Steve, and suddenly the population is 100 million. Right. So how come?
That matches. That matches.
Yeah, that matches. So what I would call this is genocide plans. Okay. So the genocide plan for the United States has been published on this website that everybody can see, and it says that 327 million Americans will be, you know, taken down to 100 million. So 227 million Americans will somehow disappear over the next 5 years. Now, if you think this is a typo, you can check every other country like the United Kingdom or Germany or anything else, and you will see similar rates. Okay. The other thing that you can see when you follow this website for a long time, like I have done, is that their numbers get updated roughly every month or every 3 months. Okay. So this isn't a mistake. These are plans.
These are plans, absolutely. And this was several years ago that I had this conversation.
Well, this actually, this says United States of America News. So this was updated yesterday, Saturday, May 30th, which I would say if it was updated, I mean, at least the news is updated on the page. So yeah, it looks like it's still in the agenda though, Katherine, because it does look like the forecast is still,
So guys, I mean, look, the 5G is obviously one deployment system that it's basically every 100 feet within a large city that these technologies has been installed in trees and lampposts, you name it. It's pervasive. The other thing is this SpaceX thing, the Starlink, 12,000 satellites, 4,500 or almost 5,000 satellites are already up there. They're covering every square inch of the planet with the technology that can access us with radiation.
Yep,
So
that's correct. That's
yeah,
right.
and you know about this.
Yeah. And now regarding the body implants, I'm still investigating how the hell they're controlling this. So for those people who maybe don't know anything about this topic, it's, you know, it's kind of shocking when I start talking about non-consensual implants. Now, the background to this is that in 2017, I found out that I was implanted. I figured out that I must have been implanted as an undergraduate at the University of Oxford, and it suddenly started making sense.
Way back then.
2017 and 18, I was scanning people who would be, I would say they identified as targeted individuals, or what I would call victims of the secret services, okay? So 2017 and 18, I scanned quite a lot of people with bug detectors, and I found chips in pretty much every person I scanned.
What?
So what that meant to me is that the secret services are implanting their victims as a standard operating procedure. And it's never just one chip you find literally dozens, okay? Then I found out that this is called a body area network. And you can find scientific papers on the body area networks and how they work. You can even find out what frequencies the chips are using to communicate. You can also find out that the Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, and mobile phone networks can all interface with these chips. Okay, now for me, the real shocker was in 2019 when I had kind of reached enough, I don't know, like a public persona that what I would call random everyday people started approaching me and asking me if they too might be implanted. Not because they felt pain or symptoms, it was more like a challenge. So it's like, hey lady, if you say all these people are implanted, am I implanted? So I would take out my bug detector and do my tests, and I would realize, oh, damn, yes, they are. And the vast majority of people, not everybody, but the vast majority of people who I scanned, you know, which I would call them random people, you know, they had no
There's no
connection.
there's no common denominator.
Exactly, yeah.
Right.
And then I started measuring my family members, even my friends, and I realized it's not just that everybody's implanted in the same places on their body. It actually follows a set pattern. So the pattern is that you would have a very strong chip that I always find very easy to locate in the neck area or on the back of the head, okay? That seems to be the chip that typically communicates with the Wi-Fi router or whatever it communicates with, okay?
Cerebral cortex.
Yeah,
no,
but it's
this is
kind
the cerebellum area of the brain, yeah.
Yeah, but remember, this is a technology that it's kind of outside of your brain. It's not necessarily inside the skull. It's just in the soft tissue in the neck area, you know? Yes. And in kind of the muscle mass that you have in the neck where they can bury it, you know, quite easily. Now, the strongest radiation typically comes out of the neck area. And then you have dozens of locations on the body. So for example, a lot of people have radio frequency emissions in the ear area, implying that they are covertly implanted in the ears with which technology that could transmit voices, you know. So the government could directly be booming something into your head, you know, if they wanted to, by just calling up your chip like they would call up your mobile phone. And then the typical other areas is that for women, I find a lot of women with radio frequency emissions from the breast area, okay? Genital areas also, and the background to this is that the chip deployment pretty much sets up all the victims for what I would call remote control rape.
Right.
Okay. And it seems to be the case that the business plan of these psychopaths is to be able to dial up any person or any woman or maybe man whom they like and rape them by remote control. Yeah. Now, what you need to also be aware is that children are also affected. Okay. Right. So when women approached me and they said, oh, I'm kind of concerned that my kid might be implanted because you know, my kid said stuff that seems to me that it's being messed with, the kids are also implanted just like their parents. Now, when you're dealing with these psychopaths, a lot of them have set up a system whereby they select other psychopaths who are also pedophiles, you know, and they are members of these pedophile rings. Well, what this means is that the governments or these criminal networks want to implant all the children so that they can be raped by any of their pedophiles at any time of the day, wherever they are.
My God.
Okay, so, and when I talk to people, I understand that a lot of adults have a very hard time accepting that non-consensual implants exist, although there's already published newspapers articles about, for example, implanting the people with Alzheimer's, you know, oh, so that granny can be found, you know, if she wanders off with her Alzheimer's.
There we go.
So that's already pretty much established. There was a human trafficking victim that claimed to have chips, and then the hospital found it indeed, and so on. So
here it is. This is the graph you're talking about. This was from a FOIA request accidentally released that talked about electronic targeting of certain areas, of certain organs or areas of the body apparently resonate at a different frequency, so you could literally target on a person their body, and it talks about special attention to genital area here, forced orgasm, intense pain, hot needles. So this is what you're talking about right here, it looks like.
Yeah, exactly. And when you go through the list, you can realize that you can see that in every area you can use it for torture. You can use these chips for torture, like intense pain, you know.
When are these implanted, and do they leave scar tissue?
They do leave scar tissue, actually. Now, when they are implanted, it goes as follows. So it seems to me that the intelligence agencies have taken over public hospitals a long, long time ago.
Okay. Any procedure is dangerous.
Any procedure can potentially be hijacked by them. So if you ever, any of your listeners ever had a medical procedure, an operation in hospital, or if they just stayed overnight in a hospital, they should check themselves for chips. But in fact, all of us should check ourselves for chips, because the intelligence agencies also, as a standard operating procedure, break into private homes. And after 2019, when I really met random people from the US and Europe, and they all seem to be implanted, I realized, oh my God, what has happened all along is that the intelligence agencies went systematically through our communities and started implanting the entire population.
Okay, I'm going to ask you a question. Okay, so we have joining with us just for the last few moments, Sergeant Daniel Brad McMullen, who we're going to be doing a part 3 to this Goldfish Report number 500, who joined us momentarily so that we could talk about where we've left off with the chip implants and how
since cutoff, you know, there's a practicality here, but you know, at the end of the day, we have to make everything a lot more local and a lot smaller than what it is today. And only when it's smaller is it more manageable, and only then have normal people actually the upper hand over psychopaths. You know, and then another thing that Steve floated, I mean, this is the limiting terms. That automatically means that you can eject, these psychopaths get ejected out of office automatically. Exactly. The other thing is also the way they are appointed. If you randomize the appointment, you know, you can also get rid of psychopaths. And I think it was the former technical director of the NSA, you know, William Binney, who's a whistleblower. He said that what he would like to do, if he could, you know, determine how the US government works, is just make public office subject of a lottery. Because when it's just a public lottery and every Joe could win the lottery and become whatever, you know, a minister, a congressperson, then it's truly random, you know. Of course, you have to control the algorithm, but if you have term limits, you know, you would basically pick average Joes the vast majority of time, not just multimillionaires. And funnily enough, you know, some bullshit would happen, but the really big bullshit wouldn't happen.
Yeah, especially if it's a country of we the people should be there to represent it for sure in you know, the United States. And of course we know that this is, you know, what's happening right now is quite sad in the US. We have these organized, social engineering going on right now with these riots in every major city. We know that we are making progress on the deep state, and that's why they're fighting back, Katherine. So I think that you're adding solutions to this is a really enlightening for us, because we spend so much time talking about the problem and we don't have enough time talking about the solution. Let me just ask Steve in our last few minutes, do you have any last questions for Katherine, Steve, or comments?
Well, I think there's too many questions to fill these minutes, but I think if you would come back again, Katherine, that would be wonderful. Would you do that?
Oh, gladly, yes. I mean, Sanana. I mean, one thing just for completion, you know, in terms of the solutions, there's only 2 more things that we should add. It is actually vital to outlaw classification. It is vital, and there's actually a method to make every, you know, secret service completely open and transparent, okay? It actually works just as much as most companies, tech companies, realize that their systems become safer if they're open source. The same applies for countries. If you get rid of classification and you impose on the secret services that whatever they uncover, they have to make public within 6 months tops,
Right.
you actually end up in a safer world. You know, I mean, if you think about the classification was intended to protect, you know, your government systems from infiltration and so on. When you have, you know, but then again, you lose in security. For example, another country has a nuclear program, okay, that you just discovered that is maybe hostile. Well, if you make that public within 6 months, right, there's a lot of people who can start acting against that, including people in the country that is perhaps hostile, you know. So, you know, but when you have classification, you always have a parallel society of insiders that can dream up business plans how to exploit the rest, okay? So classification. Yeah,
What's
and
that,
then
Steve?
the final thing that I would add into the mix to solve these problems is public accounting for large organizations. And now we have the software tools to have every government account fully public. It is possible to have a website where you can log in and check every local council and every penny that was spent on a pencil or a tank or you know,
or a bribe.
salaries. Yeah, or contractors, you know.
Well, isn't that what the quantum computer, quantum financial system is supposed to do? It's supposed to have maybe more on a large scale level, but you're supposed to, if this is not a theory, it's supposed to prevent, I mean, you're supposed to see everything, complete transparency, like you're saying, Katherine.
I'm not sure if that's what it does. I mean, ultimately, quantum computing, just like normal computing, can be used for anything. You know, it doesn't have transparency encoded in it. So we really need laws and international agreements that, you know, we want to sign up to this. And it's almost like, you know, constitutions and laws for organizations, you know.
Excellent.
That we need.
Okay. Let me ask Dan, did you have a final comment? I know you jumped in at the end of this because actually a lot of what we talk about overlaps. So we'll be starting part 3 with Dan. We'll follow this interview. And did you have anything you want to say, you know, before we leave, just because you're here?
Well, I thank you for I thank everybody here for the opportunity to do this and to share and to learn, because I'm in need of learning as well. I'm not to the point of this understanding how to measure things. I really don't, and Katherine's good at that. You guys are probably good at that as well. But I know the practical application, and I can show many, many examples. But I do thank everyone here for giving me the opportunity to be a part of this and to share. I think we're going to have a wonderful time learning how to cheat and get around these things to the point where we basically neutralize them. We splinter these organizations into a million pieces.
Well, I mean, it's like reverse engineering, and somehow we're doing this. Somehow President Trump's involved in this. And Katherine, I just want to thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure. I know this was a little bit unusual having this in. We had a little break there for a little while, but I thought it was interesting. So thank you very much, Katherine. It's been really quite a pleasure and an honor to have you on GoldFish Report, and I do hope you will return, and so we can continue these conversations at another time.
The pleasure is entirely mine, Louisa, and thank you very much to your listeners also that they basically take the initiative to listen to these things, because it is sometimes very, very hard, you know, to spend your free time learning about these things. But at the end of the day, it will be a worthwhile thing to do, and we all have to just, you know, accept the fact that these problems do not go away unless we all take part in solving them. So thank you very much to you all.
Thank you. And folks, I'm going to have in the description section of this video, I'm going to have Katherine's website there. And you can also support her at her Patreon page, where she does make different levels of membership available for information for people. And, you know, as you all know, it's very difficult in these times to overcome the obstacles that they put in our way when it comes to economics. So it does help to support Katherine and her projects and her work, and I'll put those links in the description section. So Dan, thanks for joining us right at the tail end here, but I look forward to continuing part 3 with you. And Steve, as always, thank you so much for being here with me and co-hosting. Appreciate your time, and Katherine. And this concludes this edition of the GoldFish Report.